Welcome back. This is chapter 4, The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck. And today I'm going to explain this chapter to you. So here we go. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? She asked question to herself, though she was supporting her husband, yet there were questions in her mind, and the question that came up in her mind was whether it was anything good to help an enemy. Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. In spite of this, she instructed Yumi to bring hot water into Sadao's father's bedroom where the white man lay. She went ahead and slid back the partitions. Sadao was not yet there. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. She went ahead of Yumi so that water didn't spill onto the floor. She slid the partitions. There in Japan, they use sliding doors. They use partitions. Here we have some other kind of doors. Sadao was not yet there, and Sadao hadn't been back. Yumi followed her. Reaching there, she put down the wooden bucket of water. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. Now, putting down the wooden bucket, she went over to the white man. She went close to the white man, and after looking at him, her thick lips folded into arrogance, into stubbornness. That is, she got such kind of feeling looking at that white man that suggested that she was not at all ready to follow the instructions of the mistress. "I have never washed a white man," she said, "and I will not wash so dirty a one now," she said. "I never washed a white man in my life, and that I am not going to do it this time too." That she was not going to follow the instructions of her mistress. Hannah cried at her severely, "You will do what your master commands you." Hannah was very much stern here, with say stern look, or say with a strong voice. She said that she had to follow the instructions. She had to follow the commands of her master or mistress, and she had to do as they wanted her to. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round dull face that Hana felt unreasonably afraid. And as she said those words, there came a look of resistance on her face. That is, her face suggested that she was arrogant, she was adamant, and that she had not given up. She didn't yield. She was not ready to follow the instruction, and that brought some kind of undue fear into the minds of the mistress, Hannah. After all, if the servant should report something that was not as it happened. So here Hannah got scared. She was suspicious of the intention of the servants. She realized here that if they were pressurized, or they would not hesitate to take some action that would be detrimental for them. That is, they might go to the police and speak up the presence of the enemy soldier in the house and present their own version, present the matter in their own way. So she was here very scared. She realized that she should not pressurize them. Very well, she said with dignity, "You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner." She said, "Very well, okay, fine. You don't want to wash him, that's fine." She said all this with the pride of a mistress. And then she said, "You understand, we only want to bring him back to his senses so that as he recovered, as he regained his health, we could hand him over to the police. That's our intention." "I will have nothing to do with it," Yumi said. "I am a poor person and it is not my business." She said, "Well, I have nothing to do with what you do with this white man. Whether after his recovery you turn him over to the police or help him flee. That's not my business to think. So, since I am a poor person, and that's not my right to ask my master what they did with a thing, with a person, or what they did with a particular issue, then please," Hannah said gently, "return to your own work." Then she asked her very gently to return to her own work, to go back and attain her work. At once Yumi left the room, but this left Hannah with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay, had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. So here, as Yumi went away, she was left there alone with the white man. In the other circumstances, in the normal circumstances, she would be quite afraid to be there with the white man alone in the room. But since her mind was preoccupied with Hannah's stubbornness and the attitude that she presented to her, so she could not think of anything else, and so she was quite at ease in that room with that white man. "Stupid Yumi," she muttered fiercely. She was quite outraged, and with that anger she muttered words sad and called Yumi stupid. Is this anything but a man, and a wounded helpless man? She questioned herself if that was not a man, a wild beast, a violent creature, but that was only a wounded and helpless man, a wounded man who couldn't do any harm to anyone, a helpless man. In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rags that kept the white man covered, and with that conviction, with that thought of superiority, of being the mistress, or being the owner or the mistress of the house, she bent impulsively. She bent down at the white man, then untied the buttons of the shirt and removed it off his chest. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. Okay, so when the chest lay bare before her, she dipped a small clean towel into the hot water that Yumi brought into the room, and with that soaked towel she washed the wounded man's face very carefully, with proper care. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of fine texture and must have been very blond when he was a child. But though the white man's skin was rough now because of the exposure, since he was out and was at sea, or say he was carried by the waves to the beach, was lying there due to this exposure, or there was some kind of roughness of the skin. But when she looked at the texture of the skin, it suggested that he had been quite fair when he was a... While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. After untying the knots of the rag, Hannah started to give him a wash, started to wipe the upper part of his body clean. So while she was doing this, she looked at the skin color, that is the complexion of this man, and had appreciation for it. But as a child, she assumed that as a child he had been very fair. So while wiping, she had this thought in her mind, but she dare not turn him over, that is, turn him to the back. Where was Sadao? She started to look for Sadao, and her anger was now ebbing, was now receding, was now coming down. So she started to become a little uneasy about her immediate surrounding. So she asked this question, and then she rose up and wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Out of tension, say, she wiped her hand on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him, and fearing that if he lay the same way, then he would catch cold. So, fearing that, she put the quilt over him. Sadao, she called softly. So having put the cover, having put the quilt over him, Sadao, she called softly. So having put the quilt over him, she was now looking for Sadao. And so she called out to him softly. He had been about to come in when she called, and it was the time when he was about to reach there. He had come near on the partition near the door. His hand had been on the door, and now he opened it. So the moment she gave him a call, he had been near the door, his hand was there on the door, and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag, and that he wore his surgeon's coat. Now, as the door was slit, she noticed some changes in him. He had put on the surgeon's coat, and there was a surgeon's emergency bag in his hand now. "You have decided to operate," she cried. She shouted. "So you have finally decided to operate him?" "Yes, he said shortly. "Now," he answered briefly, only uttered yes. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma alcove and put his instruments out upon it. So now, entering the room and reaching near the man, he turned his back towards his wife, and then, unfolding a sterilized towel, he had sterilized towel in his hand, and he unfolded it now, spread it on put it on the floor, that is on the tokonoma alcove floor, that is, you can say, on the carpet, and then spread all his instrument out upon this towel. "Fetch towels," he said. Now he asked for towels, more towels. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. Now she followed him very sincerely, that is, she was very sincere to all his commands, and went straight to the linen shelves to take some towels from there. But she was quite anxious, she was quite worried now. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. Now she thought that there would also be required some mattings, some mats would also be required, short mats would also be required, otherwise that would damage the fine carpet there. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights, and took an armful of them. So from there, thinking in that way, she went to back veranda, that is back side of the veranda, and from there she brought in a handful of mats which were spread on the shrubs, delicate shrubs, to protect them from cold on cold nights. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless, and when she reached the room, she found that it was all useless because the blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. She found it useless because the blood had already dripped from his wound and had damaged the carpet. "Oh, the mat!" she cried. She shouted, she exclaimed, and said that, "Well, the mat is gone." "Yes, it's ruined," Sadao replied, and Sadao replied very plainly, "Yes, that's gone," as though he did not care, and his expression was such that suggested that he did not care, he didn't bother about the carpet a little, that is, he cared the damage of the carpet the least. "Help me turn him," he commanded her. He now asked her to render him help to turn him to his back. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. She obeyed him very sincerely, and then as he was turned to his back, he started to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him, she said. So here she informed that Yumi refused to wash him. "Did you wash him then?" Sadao asked, not stopping for a moment his swift, concise movements. So while he was still washing his back with short, concise movement and doing it very swiftly, he asked whether she did all the washing herself. Yes, she said, and she replied yes. He did not seem to hear, but she was used to his absorption when he was at work. Okay, now as she replied, he seemed not to hear her. He was so much absorbed, he was so much busy with his work that he seemed not to hear her words. He seemed not to follow her words. And she was quite used to such kind of things, because whenever he was busy with work, he would not follow others' work. One day, she gave a thought to her mind, and she was now looking for the answers to some of the questions that came up in her mind. The questions like whether her husband would fairly treat the man lying on the floor, or whether he would discriminate him on the basis since he was an enemy. So whether he would do proper justice to his profession, that was the question in her mind. But so far as his work ethic, work culture was concerned, whenever he took up a case, he always did justice to it. He always did his work so efficiently and so excellently. And since here, in this case, he was totally absorbed in his work, so she expected a fair result here. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it, he said. Now, Sadao asked her to apply anesthetic, to administer anesthetic if the situation such demanded. She repeated blankly, but never have I. Now, she was taken aback at the remark of Sadao. She was shocked at his remark, and she said she repeated it, that she never administered anesthetic to anyone. So she blankly, thoughtlessly answered this. It is easy enough, he said impatiently, and sharply he retorted, sharply he answered back and said that it was quite easy to do it. He was taking out the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly, and as he was now removing the packing from the wound, the packing that he did at the beach, that is the moss that he used to pack the wound, was now being removed by him. So as he removed the packing, blood started to stream out more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. Now he examined the wound with the help of the light attached to his forehead, that is called the surgeon's light. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. With indifference, he remarked that the bullet was still there. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. Now, the real question for the doctor was whether the wound received from the rock was really deep or not. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. And then he remarked that, well, if the wound from the rock wasn't deep, then the bullet could easily be removed. But the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood, but the blood loss, that is the bleeding, was not trivial. That was not casual. That was quite serious bleeding. He has lost much blood. That he had lost much blood, too much blood. At this moment, Hannah choked. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. As Sadao was removing the packing from the wound, that sight really choked Hannah, and she felt like vomiting now. Sadao looked up and her face was yellowish in color. That is, her face got the tinge of yellow color. "Don't faint," he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument. "If I stop now, the man will surely die." So here, Sadao asked his wife not to faint, because if she fainted, then that would be quite a critical situation for him to handle, because he could not take care of two of them. And here, this patient being critical, so he needed more care. So he said all this without putting down his exploring instrument, the instrument with which he was working. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. So clapping, that is putting both her hands onto her mouth, she leaped, she jumped and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching, and outside in the garden, she was vomiting, and that sound could be heard by Sadao, the doctor, here in his room. But he went on with his work, but he did not pay much attention, much heed to the thing that was going on outside. Rather, this patient needed more attention, more care, so he kept on working. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. And now he thought that, well, this would be better for her that she emptied her stomach. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. While thinking in that order, he forgot that she never had witnessed any operation. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. But the distress, the discomfort that his wife experienced, or his wife was experiencing, and his inability to attend her, to go near her, was making him impatient and irritable with this man. Because of this man only, he could not go near and comfort his beloved. This man who lay under his knife like a dead. This man was lying under his knife. That is, here knife means, since he was a doctor, he was operating, so under the knife of the doctor, he lay like a dead. So Sadao was now a little uneasy. He was concerned for the health of his wife, and so he became a little impatient and aggressive, a bit aggressive in nature. Now he started to think that this man had no reason to live on this planet, on this earth. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless, and he proceeded swiftly. And this thought that he shouldn't live on this earth made him a little ruthless, little pitiless, unkind, and he started to move about his work quite swiftly, that is, paying a little attention to all the details. In his dream, the man moaned, but Sadao paid no heed except to mutter at him, and as he started to move about quite swiftly, paying little attention to all the details, so the man began to moan, he began to cry in pain. But Sadao paid no heed, no attention to his moaning, to his pain, except muttering a few words at him, saying a few things to him. Groan, he muttered, groan if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing it. Now he said that, well, groan if you like. If you're groaning, if you're, crying in pain, you may continue to do so, because he said he was not doing this for his own pleasure. There is no fun doing that. He's getting no, fun. He's not getting any kind of, joy doing this. So, if he liked, he could moan. And he fantasized, in fact, he did not have any idea why he was doing so. The door opened and there was Hannah again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. Now the door opened, and with the opening of the door, there appeared Hannah. She came near her husband and asked him in a very clear and resolute voice where was anesthetic, because she found that there was the need of anesthetic now, and she wanted to come to some help to her husband. Sadao motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back, he said. This fellow is beginning to stare. Sadao didn't speak a word. He just motioned his chin to point out the liquid, to point out anesthetic, and then he said, it's quite good that you returned, because this man was now beginning to move. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? She asked. Now she had the bottle of the liquid in her hand, and also the cotton with her, and now she asks us how to do it, because she never did it previously. Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostril. Sadao replied without delaying for one moment the intricate details of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. And so, as he was going through the intricate details, that is very close details of his work, so he could not afford to stop his work, delay his work for a moment. So, without getting any kind of interruption in his work, he gave instructions to his wife and asked her to saturate the cotton, soak cotton in the liquid, and then hold it near his nostril until he started to breathe heavily, until he started to have some difficulty in breathing, and then move it away. She crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously thin face, she thought, and the lips were twisted. The man was suffering, whether he knew it or not. Now she went near the head of the young American lying on the floor, and looking at his face, she realized that it was quite thin, piteously thin. It was quite thin, and that the lips were getting twisted, or lips were twisted, so that also gave the impression to her that he was going through pain, that he was experiencing pain now, whether he was aware of it or not. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of the prisoners were true. Now looking at this face of this American, that is the painful expression that was coming on his face, looking at this expression, she wondered whether the stories they heard of the sufferings of the prisoners of war were all true. They came like flickers of rumors told by word of mouth and always contradicted, that is, they were often unsustained rumors shared by people in their communication, in their talks, and then always contradicted, and always it was contradicted by others. In the newspapers, their reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly, with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. So, on the one hand, there was very high praise, high degree of appreciation for the Japanese forces, for their act on foreign land, as they liberated natives of many countries from the cruel system, from the cruel rulers. But on the other hand, there were also stories in their own country of the general, like the General Takima, who used to beat his own wife very mercilessly, very callously. Though he's not talked about, he's not talked of now these days, there are people hardly talk about him, yet he displayed great courage, great amount of valor in his expedition, in his victories in a battle in Manchuria. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? And there comes a question, if such a general can be so callous to his wife, would he not be cruel to a man, to his enemy, like the one lying here, for instance? She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured, and she hoped that this man was not tortured at all. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck, just under his ear, and at that moment, as she was thinking of him, of the tortures and all, she noticed some red scars, deep red scars on his neck, just under his ear. Those scars, she murmured, lifting her eyes to Sadao. But he did not answer. And then she murmured, those scars, lifting her eyes to Sadao. She muttered these words, those scars, but he did not answer. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously near the kidney. At that moment only, the tip of his instrument, as he was examining the body. So that moment only, the tip of his instrument struck against something very hard, and it was dangerously located close to kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. Now, having found out the exact location of the bullet in the body, now Dr. Sadao's only concern, only focus was how to remove that bullet from the body and save the life of his patient. And as this location was found out, it excited him, it filled him with pure excitement. He probed with his fingers, delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. Now, as he was well versed with every part of the human body, he had good knowledge, thorough knowledge of the human body and its parts. So he now probed, examined the bullet with his own fingers, very delicately, finely. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge, and it was all due to the old American professor who made sure that his student had no doubt, had no confusion about this body, and that they had thorough knowledge, in-depth knowledge of this body. Ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's cardinal sin, sirs, and lecturing them, he would say that if a surgeon is ignorant of the human body, if he has no complete idea, no complete knowledge of this human body, then it is a kind of a grave crime against his patient. He had thundered at his classes year after year, and he repeated his statement, this statement of his, year after year in his classes. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body as if you had made it, anything less than that is murder. And he would also say that you must go to operate a person, operate your patient with such knowledge as if you only had made this body, and that you have complete idea of it. And anything less than that, anything less than this sort of confidence in you would be something like murdering that patient. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend, Sadao murmured, and now, after examining it with his fingers, he realized that the bullet was not quite close to the kidney. And he murmured these words and uttered him. He mentioned him as friend. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation, when he got too much absorbed in his work, when he got fully absorbed in his work. He would forget about everything, and in such a state he would murmur, he would talk to his patient, and that was his habit. My friend, he always called his patients, and so now he did, and he would always call his patient his friend. He would call my friend to his patients whenever he was lost in his work and his operation, forgetting that this was his enemy. And this time too he uttered the same thing, forgetting that it was his enemy. this time. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions, the bullet was out, and then quickly, very swiftly, and with cleanest and most precise, that is, accurately and neatly, he cut that part of the wound and then removed the bullet from there. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious, though the man quivered as he removed the bullet from the body, but he was unconscious still. Nevertheless, he muttered a few English words in spite of this. Though he was unconscious, yet he muttered a few English words. Guts. He muttered, choking. They got my guts. So he uttered words like guts. They got my guts, while still being at a state of unconsciousness and while his voice getting stifled. Sadao! Hannah cried sharply. Hush! Sadao said. So getting alarmed at the mutterings of the patient, Hannah cried out to Sadao. And in reply, Sadao simply said, hush, to keep her quiet. The man sank again into silence so profound that Sadao took up his wrist, hating the touch of it. Now, as the man became very much silent after uttering a few words, now Sadao took up his wrist to examine his pulse, though he hated the enemy's touch. Yes, there was still a pulse, so faint, so feeble, but enough, if he wanted the man to live, to give hope. Now, he examined it and he found that the pulse was still there, though it was weak. It was very weak, yet that was enough to give him hope if he wanted, if Sadao wanted him to live. If he wanted him to survive, he could give him that life. It depended on him now. But certainly, I do not want this man to live, he thought. But then the thought came to his mind, and he said that, well, certainly, I do not want this man to live. That he did not want that this enemy should live. No more anesthetic, he told Hannah. Now he said, no more anesthetic. No more anesthetic was needed. He turned as swiftly as though he had never paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial, and from it filled a hypodermic and thrust it into the patient's left arm. Now he realized that he needed no more anesthetic, and now he turned very swiftly. Very swiftly he turned to the other side, as though he had never paused, as though he had never stopped his work. And then from his medicine, from the box of his medicine, he lifted, he pulled up a small vial, and from it filled hypodermic liquid and thrust it into the patient's left arm. That is, he filled the syringe with the liquid from the vial and then pushed it into the patient's left arm. Then putting down the needle, he took the man's wrist again, and then putting down that needle, that syringe, he picked up the man's wrist to examine it if there was any progress after injecting him with the life life-saving liquid. The pulse under his fingers fluttered once or twice and then grew stronger, and the pulse he felt, when he felt the pulse at first fluttered, moved once and twice, and then it grew stronger, that the pulse started to grow very strong. This man will live in spite of all, he said to Hannah and sighed. Now the doctor said that this man was going to live despite everything that happened to him, to his life. And saying this to Hannah, he sighed. He took out a deep breath. The young man woke so weak, his blue eyes so terrified, when he perceived where he was, that Hannah felt compelled to apologize. When the young man regained consciousness a few hours after the operation, he was terrified. There was terror in his blue eyes as he perceived, when he saw where he was. That is, he realized that he was again in the Japanese setup. All the setup in the house was Japanese, and he ran away. He escaped from the custody of the Japanese forces, and again he was in a Japanese house, so that filled him with terror. Though he was weak, the terror could be easily perceived in his eyes, and because he was so terrified, that Hannah was compelled to apologize. She asked for forgiveness that he was so terrified there.